Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. Thank you once again so much for joining us. Lots to talk about again today. The opening night of the Wisconsin State Fair is ruined by mobs of young punks. A wild and chaotic week on Wall Street has some people wondering if we're headed into yet another recession. And we'll get everyone's thoughts on what's going to happen in Tuesday's recall elections here in Wisconsin. All right, let me introduce everyone. We have newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway, the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant on education matters and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's get right into it. A very sad and dangerous opening night at the Wisconsin State Fair. Mobs of young punks were reportedly beating and harassing people at random on the grounds and outside the grounds. Once again, witnesses say it was young African-American kids causing the problems. Now, a friend of mine, Gerard, told me today what he does every year when Summerfest comes and when State Fair comes is he looks at the main stage acts, and if it's a black main stage act, he doesn't go that night because there's more potential for problems. I think that's sad, but I can certainly understand why somebody would feel that way, especially now.
Well, the act that was there last night.
But then again, yeah. The act last night, I don't think Funky Cold Medina is going to, bring a real young crowd in.
No, I think this clearly was an age group, teenagers, and maybe 25 at the oldest involved.
And it was in the game area.
And it was over in the Midway.
Nowhere near MC Hammer.
Nowhere near MC Hammer.
Who they never heard of.
Well, the grandfather of rap. I think two problems with this. One, and it goes back again to my view that when you have large numbers of young people, regardless of who they are, you still need to exercise better crowd control. And that's one of the areas where some of our venues, like Summerfest, have done a much better job. I wouldn't go as far as eliminating the Midway in order to eliminate some problems as some people perceive it. But I do think that State Fair has wizened as to how they can better manage the groups of young people who come through and have certainly more people who are keeping the numbers of young folk who travel through, instead of going through in 50s, keeping them down to maybe a half a dozen. The other, and this is personal responsibility, the number of young people who go through intent on causing trouble should be prepared for the consequences. And unfortunately, what they're doing is setting the stage for young people who have no involvement, no intention of being involved in this type of serious crime activity. And it's serious crime in my book when you go out and you're intent on beating someone up. This wasn't haphazard. This was planned. When you go about doing that, you ought to be prepared for the consequences of your actions. And unfortunately, people are going to start to toughen not just the consequences, but they're going to start removing opportunities for young people to actually have something positive to do in this community.
But Denise, are the consequences that bad? I mean, what happened? What has happened so far to the kids that were involved in the River West thing? You haven't really heard that these were severely punished kids.
Well, I mean, because I think they're still going through the criminal justice system. I think that's part of it. And there were parents who certainly, clearly when when they saw their kids, they turned them in, and there is a justice process that we do have to go through. But I think we have to take a look at these acts, which were absolutely reprehensible and would have been reprehensible whether or not it's a group of African-American kids or a group of Caucasian kids or a group of Hmong kids or a group of Latino kids. These acts are absolutely reprehensible. I think we do have to take a look at what kind of consequences the kids face. But I think, and this is not to make an excuse for kids, I think when we have to take a look at these incidents repeatedly happening, we have to ask ourselves, what is happening in our community where we allow this to be acceptable? And by that, I don't mean the African-American community. I mean, what's happening in our entire community? Why are these things happening? And I think that's a question that as adults in this community, we have to ask. Is it that kids don't have proper supervision? And maybe we do need to take a look at the way that we tighten controls and manage space better in these large venues. As a community, Are we offering enough opportunities for kids to get out and to have positive interactions so kids learn how to behave and interact in large settings? I think as a community we have to say to ourselves, why do these incidents continue to happen? And not, as some people have done in response to this, kind of throw out accusations against whole communities, but say, as a community, we have to ask ourselves, what is happening with our kids? What do we need to do, and what are we not doing? That does not excuse the behavior of these kids who were involved. But I think if we don't ask some questions about why this is happening and what we as adults in the community need to do to help prevent it, we're going to have these incidents happen again.
Kevin, why do they happen so often?
They happen because, and this is not an indictment of a single particular community, but certain folks in that community come from a meltdown in the family. There are no values. There are no morals. There are no principles. They're just bad, and they were there not to enjoy the midway. They were there to randomly attack other people. That and the consequences are not swift. They are not severe. If the young kids who are under 17, 18 are apprehended, they know that they will go to juvie and get a slap on the wrist. I commend State Fair for taking the quick action that they did. It's unfortunate now that the majority of youngsters are going to have to suffer by this new curfew because of what happened the other night, but it has to be done because you have one of the most premier events in the state of Wisconsin. 1 million more people come every year from all over the state, from other states. You have to give the impression, the perception that you are going to provide a safe environment for people to enjoy the fair. You cannot allow this to happen. I think it starts in the family, and then you have to throw the book at these kids, catch them, punish them swiftly and severely so that it doesn't happen again. I think what State Fair did will prevent anything from happening at the fair this year again. But as we're seeing, it's not a Milwaukee phenomenon. It's happening all around the country with these wilding incidents. There will be another event, a major happening where this could happen if this isn't handled properly.
But you know what? There are a lot of families right now tonight in Woodruff and Rhinelander and all those northern counties going, see, honey, that's why I don't want to go down to Milwaukee. It's a scary place to go.
Yeah.
I mean, this hurts our image.
And it's a racist reaction, as some of the things I've just heard are a racist reaction. We all know the worst crime in recent years that took place at State Fair. It was when the mayor of Milwaukee was beaten severely and practically killed. And it was by a white individual. I did not have to come on this show and explain why white people act that way. I did not have, the white race did not, get this kind of condemnation of what's wrong with the white community that this sort of thing happens. Yes, this was a bad incident. The State Fair reaction of banning all young people after 5 o'clock is absurd. This is an entertainment venue. It's a family entertainment venue, and it should be an open venue for all ages, as it always has been. But as a result of this incident, and as a result of some of the racist reaction to this incident, a whole lot of young people are now going to be denied that opportunity. I absolutely agree with Denise that we have to look at what's behind this, and it's not what's wrong with the black community. It's what's wrong with this community. What aren't we doing? And boy, you don't have to look very far to see what we aren't doing. When you see the state of Wisconsin gutting the schools that young black kids go to, taking hundreds of millions of dollars away from them, denying them education, denying them employment, denying their parents employment. Yeah, you've got some angry kids and you've got some kids that are doing some bad things. And believe me, they are not getting a slap on the wrist. Young black people enter the criminal justice system and never get out of it again. Spend the rest of their lives in the criminal justice system one way or another. And that will probably happen to some of these young people. But we got to talk about what we need to do to correct these problems. And it's not just what the parents of these black kids need to do. Yeah, there are family problems in the black community. There sure are. And there are family problems in the white community. There sure are. But we don't condemn the white community. We do condemn these young people.
All right, next topic. It was a wild and chaotic week on Wall Street. Thursday was one of the worst days ever. It has a lot of people wondering if maybe we're heading into a second recession, or if the recovery is just going to take much, much longer than most of the experts predicted it would. Kevin.
Well, we were supposed to be in the summer recovery last year. It didn't happen. And it's not happening this year. And if you read the Wall Street Journal, major newspapers from around the country, economic periodicals, you will see that economists are saying that a double-dip recession is inevitable. I believe that it's because the approach being taken in Washington, it has not worked. And it is President Obama's economy. It starts at the top with him. The problem with the president is that he believes that the solution to our economic woes is more, bigger government. We've tried that. Stimulus packages, buyouts, bailouts. It hasn't worked. We've created 129 new boards, commissions, agencies with rule after rule, regulation after regulation, putting up obstacles to businesses from doing business and creating the jobs that will get us out of the economy. I say step back, let the private sector do its magic, give them the climate that will allow them to be innovative and create the jobs that will get us out of these economic woes. Because if we don't, this will be the issue in 2012. And you can't blame George Bush anymore. You can't blame the Japanese earthquake. You can't blame the Japanese tsunami or the drought in the Southwest or the crisis in Europe. It starts with him, and he hasn't presented a budget. He was practically AWOL on the debt ceiling, letting the Senate and the House figure it out. He's got to come up with new plans, because what's been done so far isn't working.
Can you blame the president for the state of our economy or the world economy?
Yes. Yes, you can, because he would be quick to blame past presidents. So there has to be some responsibility that he assumes for his own leadership and be accountable for the decisions or the lack of decisions that are made. I'll give you examples. You have a lot of uncertainty, not just in the markets, but you have a lot of uncertainty in the business community where they're sitting on top of stockpiles of cash, not wanting to invest it because they don't know what tax policy is going to be. They don't know what the ability to compete in foreign markets is going to be. All of these things go directly back to presidential decisions around economic policy. And if you're saying that you're going to tax the daylights out of someone, and the minute that you get an opportunity to do that, that's the policy you're going to implement, then if I were a businessman, I'd sit on top of my money too. You have foreign markets where in Greece, Spain, Italy, even in some of the smaller Asian countries where, like South Korea, that are emerging markets that had become stronger, there's uncertainty there as well. And there's a lack of investment in some of those countries because of the high amount of debt that they have. Look at what we did in this country by adding on another entitlement that we can scarcely afford. 2/3 of our budget in 5 years is going to be just for the cost of entitlements. I don't understand why we have the schizophrenic policy that we have, but that's what we have under this president, and that's what we're dealing with economically now.
Do you blame Obama at all?
I blame Obama for caving into the Tea Party. Clearly what happened this week with the economy was the horrendous actions of the Republicans, particularly the Tea Party Republicans, who threatened to bring this country to the brink of default, threatened to send this country into another depression if they didn't get their way of enormous cuts in spending. And as soon as that passed, what happened? The stock market dropped. And it dropped for good reason. Every economist, Republican economist to Democratic economist, right to left, says this is the worst possible time in our history to be cutting spending massively, which is what the Tea Party insisted on and said we're going to throw the country into default unless you do what we say. This was a domestic terrorist organization that had taken control of the U.S. House of Representatives. And yes, I blame Barack Obama for letting them get by with it and for letting them get away with so much. Every economist says right now, and I'm saying right and left economists, the thing we need right now is to create more jobs, not to cut spending. And that is what the president now says, okay, you know, this Tea Party held us up and made us do this because they threatened to ruin the economy if we wouldn't do it, but now we have to concentrate on jobs. So I want to see those Republicans concentrate on jobs. They have been trying to sabotage this economy to defeat Barack Obama in 2012. They don't want the economy to work. They want to sabotage the economy, and they've been doing their damnedest to do it. And we have to start concentrating on what really needs to happen, which is create more jobs. The private sector is not creating those jobs. We've been giving them tax breaks and letting them have their tax breaks, and they haven't created a damn job.
You know why that is?
And in fact, right now, Scott Walker is cutting jobs in the state of Wisconsin, laying off teachers, laying off public employees, and that is just the opposite of what we need to do right now.
No, there have been 40,000 jobs created.
I
want to respond to that because there was so much.
Let me get my 30 seconds in before Kevin interrupts me, or maybe he's going to even do that first.
He said Governor Walker is cutting jobs. There have been 40,000 new private sector jobs created in the state since he took office.
Dan, did you have a question for me?
Denise.
Yeah. I mean, let's get some facts on the table, which I know, Kevin, the facts are always a troublesome thing for you, and I apologize for that, but they are.
But here comes the
so let's
lecture.
talk about what's really going on here. Anybody who would expect within a 3-year period of time for an economy that brought us to the brink of the Great Depression of this century to recover is not dealing either in the laws of economics or just plain good common sense and history. One thing that we know about the Great Recession is that we had to spend tax money, and taxes were increased during the Great Depression of the last century to help us get out of it. That was part of it. The other thing that we did during the last Great Depression that we had was when we had wars, as we've done with every other war but these, we've actually raised taxes to help pay for it. So, you know, those are some of the facts that we have to deal with when we take a look at what's really going on with this economy. You know, some other facts that we have to take a look at are what has happened, and Joel's absolutely right. This Congress, primarily the House, which is controlled by Republicans, has fought this president for the past year on every single thing it could. It has not focused on jobs, which is what it said was going to be job one. Job one for the other party is to do everything it can to slow this economy down so the president is not elected. What's happening in this country, and we see it not by what I say or not by what Joel says, but by the polls and the results of average Americans, is that a lot of this lays on the doorstep of Congress. That's why the most recent poll showed Congress with a 14% approval rating.
Well,
people who are out there living their everyday lives, watching what's going on, understand what is happening here. Well, but it's much shorter than your 2 minutes, so I guess we're even. So, you know, it's so funny, Kevin. Actually, there was a lady in the grocery store who stopped me the other day and said, why does Kevin only give you 30 seconds to speak before he interrupts you?
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
What was she timing you with? You know, an abacus?
Probably, well, I don't know, probably something that was, you know, made by, you know, the Republicans who are saying that, you know, they give people plenty of time to vote on something.
The Democratic-controlled Senate has had over 800 days and has yet to come through with a budget. And Joel, the reason why some states are not businesses in some states, unlike Wisconsin, are not hiring is because they're leery at the cost of each additional hire. What will government health care do to their overall costs if they bring on new employees?
People do not have confidence in this Congress. That is the reason they're not moving forward.
Including the majority of Republicans.
This has been a do-nothing Congress that has been about blocking.
And destroy the economy.
It's only been in power in the House for 1 year. This president has had
1 year. 1 year.
1 year.
1 year at a time.
You can't say that this Congress has been
1 year at a time when you are elected on the promise of creating jobs,
this
and
Congress
you do
has
not move
been
forward
the Congress
with job
that
creation.
has discombobulated
you don't have
the president's
a single job bill that you introduce.
I'm in control. I am in control. I lost control 15 years ago.
You gave the introductions.
All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about the 6th Senate recall election.
We're going to another topic now.
This coming Tuesday. The big questions here locally are, does Alberta Darling hold on to her seat? And statewide, people are wondering, will the Republicans retain control of the state Senate?
Yes, the Republicans will retain control, probably at most lose 2 seats. Alberta Darling will retain her seat.
Will you be surprised if Alberta Darling loses?
I'd be stunned. She's She's a conservative in a highly conservative district. She did what she said she was going to do. She worked hard on a state budget that is now balanced. She did it without increasing taxes. She's been good for that district for a long time. Sandy Pash is running a campaign where she hasn't said one positive thing about herself, and it's been one missile attack after another against Alberta Darling. The Ribs for Votes scandal that popped this week will not help Sandy Pash. I disagree. I don't think
the gift cards for Alberta Darling. What about that particular scandal with Right for Life?
I don't think the Republicans are going to lose seats. In fact, they may even pick up seats. But they will keep the Senate. Although, again, this is all speculation. I don't think any of us really have a clear crystal ball because, as I stated on the program a couple weeks ago, this has never happened in the state history.
Yeah, and I wonder why it is that.
Well, because Democrats who didn't get their way in November are now trying to reverse the November election by going to recall. I'm not done.
Administration.
I'm not done. And these recalls.
Let me get my timer going on this clock.
Go
ahead.
It in 5 seconds. These recalls, both sides are energized. It's a matter of turnout in the middle of the summer.
If the Senate's maintained control, you have to be worried, being a liberal Democrat, about what's going to be pushed through the legislature because every single one of them.
Let me make my prediction, which is that the Democrats will win 6 seats.
Wow.
This coming. You're right. No one really knows.
We don't.
The polling is totally inaccurate. But I'll tell you what I'm basing that on. I'm basing that on the anger. You saw it, yeah. You could blame what happened to State Fair on Scott Walker if you wanted to. Did you see the mob out there protesting when he made an appearance?
Disabled that you have to go to.
But the truth of the matter is, look at this. These 6 elections on Tuesday, they are in Republican districts. These are Republican incumbents. These are districts that the redistricting, that corrupt redistricting plan that the legislature passed hasn't even taken effect yet. These are already Republican districts, and they're talking about how many are we going to lose. The reason they're going to lose them is because they betrayed their own voters. The Republicans don't necessarily support gutting education in the state of Wisconsin. They don't necessarily support, eliminating bargaining rights that have been in existence under Republicans and Democrats for half a century. They are going to lose big because people are energized. Look at the turnout just for the primaries, those phony primaries when the Republicans put up phony candidates. Was enormous, and the real elections are going to be even bigger.
I'll bet you your subscription of Wall Street Journal that you're wrong.
Denise, Kevin says you get 30 seconds.
Yeah. Wow. So which means really more like 5, because he's got to get his watch fixed. I would say this is going to be really difficult to call for all the reasons that both Joel and Kevin had mentioned. This is just uncharted territory. But I think the fact that it's uncharted territory and the fact that we're having these recall elections shows that people's anger still continues to be very high. And we know that when we get people out to vote, it's all about, particularly in special elections, it's all about that motivation. Who can get that base out there working? I will tell you, there are people that are out there working like crazy for Sandy Pash, just as there are people who are working very hard for Alberta Darling. I think it's going to come down to turnout and who can get their voters there and which voters are the most motivated. I think that the Republicans are going to lose at least 2 seats. I don't think they're going to do all 6, but I do think they're going to lose at least 2.
This will be an interesting election. Well, it's been a year of nonstop political combat, both in Washington and closer to home. And it's got Rick Horowitz wondering whether some of our elected representatives are actually doing much representing. Rick.
Interesting experiment they've been running in Washington lately. Here's the question they've been testing. Does it still matter what the public thinks? About public policies, I mean, things that affect them. Does the public's opinion still carry any weight? At least I think that was the experiment. Now, the old political theory was that political parties couldn't afford to get too extreme in their positions in either direction. If they did, if they ever found themselves too far out of step with the public, well, they'd trim their sails and move back toward the sensible center. That is, they would if they knew what was good for them. And with all the opinion polls out there, they'd know. And if they didn't move, well, first the support would dry up in those polls, and then the contributions would dry up, and finally the votes would dry up. When Election Day rolled around, they'd be voted out, which is why they'd move. But not this time, not with the debt ceiling debate. Despite all kinds of polls showing that all kinds of people, not just Democrats or independents, but rank-and-file Republicans too, despite all the polls showing voters overwhelmingly in favor of a compromise a compromise that was a mix of program cuts and increased taxes. Republican politicians refused to budge. We don't need a balanced solution, they kept saying. We need a balanced budget. Balanced their way, of course, with no tax increases on people who can best afford them and huge program cuts for people who can't, which is what happened. And what the voters said they wanted, even Republican voters, who cares? When politicians are on a mission these days, an extreme take no prisoners, no compromise mission, they don't care what the voters think. That's true of some congressional leaders, apparently, and some of our state leaders, too, from governors right on down to state legislators. Now, if public opinion doesn't matter anymore, if the politicians won't adjust, then the only way to change things is with public votes. Replace them. For out-of-control Washington politicians, that mostly means waiting until November of 2012. But for out-of-control Wisconsin politicians, it starts on Tuesday.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.